Her light a true story from Oregon. My son-in-law threw hot tea at me and said, "You sit there like some kind of princess, eating our groceries, contributing absolutely nothing," and slammed his plate down. So I donated the house while they slept. They said I was dead weight. I gave the land new life instead. My hands trembled as Marcus slammed the steaming mug down, sending scalding tea splashing across my lavender sweater. "You sit there like some kind of princess," he snarled, his face twisted with contempt. "Eating our groceries, using our utilities, contributing absolutely nothing. You are nothing but dead weight in this house." The words struck harder than the burning liquid seeping through my clothing. At 68, with my recent knee replacement still healing, I had learned to expect cruelty from my son-in-law. But this morning felt different, more final, more decisive. It was supposed to be a peaceful Tuesday morning in our Portland suburb, the kind where autumn light filtered gently through the kitchen windows and the aroma of pancakes and fresh coffee created warmth. I had risen early, as was my habit, moving carefully to avoid disturbing anyone. My knees protested each step, but I had grown accustomed to managing pain quietly. I had prepared the table with my usual precision, the way I used to when Robert was alive, and waited. My daughter Sarah descended first, wrapped in a burgundy robe, eyes glued to her smartphone screen. She barely acknowledged my cheerful greeting. Then came the grandchildren, Emma and Tyler, ages 9 and 6. They offered genuine smiles and settled into their customary seats. Finally, he appeared, Marcus, my son-in-law, 6 feet tall, broad-shouldered, with eyes that could freeze water. He poured himself coffee without speaking, then grabbed a plate of the pancakes Sarah had prepared. He settled heavily into his chair at the table's head, eating without acknowledgement. I occupied the corner spot, as had become my routine. At the table's edge, my plate held a single pancake and some fruit. I never requested more, never wanted to appear demanding. I maintained my smile, always trying to project pleasantness. "Good morning, Marcus," I said softly. He ignored me completely, chewing loudly and deliberately. The silence grew thick. Sarah pretended not to notice. The children whispered about some television show. I reached for my tea, being extra careful not to spill, when Marcus's chair suddenly scraped backward violently. "You know what? I am finished with this charade," he announced sharply. Everyone froze. "You sit there like some kind of princess," he snarled, turning toward me with fury in his eyes. "Eating our groceries, using our utilities, contributing absolutely nothing." Sarah's head jerked up. Emma dropped her fork. Tyler shrank into his seat. I stared at him, stunned. I do try to help." "Marcus," the doctor said, "my knee needs more time." He laughed bitterly, a sound devoid of any warmth. "Your knee? You have been here 8 months, doing nothing except taking up space, consuming our resources, draining our budget." "Marcus, please," Sarah whispered, her eyes wide with embarrassment. "Not today." But he wasn't finished. He grabbed his mug of tea, still steaming hot, and in one sudden, violent motion hurled it toward me. The scalding liquid splashed across my lap, soaking my lavender sweater and burning my skin. I gasped, not from physical pain, but from the shock of such deliberate cruelty. The mug clattered to the floor and rolled under the refrigerator. I looked down at the dark stain spreading across my clothing, my hands shaking uncontrollably. The children stared at me with wide, horrified eyes. Then, as if the assault wasn't sufficient, Marcus slammed his plate down onto the table with such force that the pancakes bounced and the ceramic cracked. "I work 60 hours a week and return home to this," he shouted. "A house full of freeloaders, eating and lounging while I pay for everything." I sat motionless, the burn on my leg throbbing intensely. No one moved. Sarah simply stared at the table, her lips pressed into a thin, tense line. "You are not my mother," Marcus said, his voice low now, venomous, "and you certainly don't have any right to live here like some privileged guest." The words pierced deep. They echoed in my mind like a gunshot, reverberating against bone. I turned to Sarah, hoping desperately for her to say something, anything. To stand up, to remember that I was her mother, that I had raised her, fed her, sat by her bedside through every illness, saved every handmade card she would ever created, that this house had once belonged to her father and me. But Sarah only whispered, "Marcus, please, not in front of the kids, not in front of the kids." The silence that followed was louder than any scream. Emma quietly offered me a napkin. I accepted it with trembling hands, dabbing at my sweater, feeling the burn and the shame and the disbelief rise in my throat. "I think I will go upstairs now," I said, my voice barely audible. No one stopped me. As I climbed the steps slowly, gripping the banister with arthritic fingers, I felt my chest constrict. Not from physical pain, but from something far worse. The realization that I no longer belonged here. That the home I had helped build, the family I had raised, the love I had poured out, had no space left for me. At the top of the stairs, I paused and looked back. Marcus was already back in his chair, scrolling through his phone. Sarah was clearing plates. The children stared at their cereal bowls as if they contained the answers to life's mysteries. That was the moment I understood. I was not a mother in this house. Not a grandmother. Not even a human being. I was just a ghost, occupying a chair that no one wanted filled. I climbed the stairs like a phantom, each step heavy, each breath more labored than the last. My legs were soaked from the tea, my sweater clinging to my skin, stinging. The hallway felt colder than usual, though I knew it was only my body responding to shock. I closed my bedroom door behind me slowly, carefully, so it wouldn't creak. Then I turned the lock, not because I feared further attacks, but because I needed desperately to feel I still possessed some measure of control. I sat on the edge of my bed, my hands trembling in my lap. The thin floral comforter I used every night was still partially folded. The pillow where I kept Robert's old watch tucked beneath it remained undisturbed. I stared at the brown stains on my legs and sweater, watching them spread like wounds. My fingers found the buttons at my collar. I undressed quietly, mechanically, and changed into a fresh house dress, one of the few I owned that wasn't worn thin. Then I sat again, still, listening. No one came upstairs. No knock on the door. No footsteps. No apologies. They had already moved on with their morning. The silence felt deafening. I pressed a hand to my chest, and my fingers touched something beneath the fabric. I reached inside and pulled out the small silver pendant I wore every day. Even now, even when they mocked me for being sentimental, I opened it with a soft click. Inside, the tiny photograph of Robert remained intact, black and white, his eyes kind, his jaw strong, the same expression he wore the day he returned from overseas. Suddenly, the years melted away. I closed my eyes. The scent of sawdust and fresh varnish filled the air. Robert stood outside with perspiration dripping from his forehead and a hammer still in his grip. He had spent months constructing that deck. He wanted everything perfect, every nail, every board. He didn't need to do it himself, but that was his nature. After returning from military service, Robert had said he wanted to create something with his hands, something peaceful, something lasting. "This house will protect you when I am gone," he told me once, holding my face in his rough, calloused hands. "That is why I am building it with my own strength." It was the summer of 1962 when we moved in. Back then, the house stood on a quiet stretch of Oregon countryside, surrounded by meadows and bird songs. There were no neighbors yet, just trees that swayed like they knew our names, and rabbits that wandered near the back fence. Robert painted the kitchen yellow because he said it reminded him of sunshine. I cooked our first meal there, with flour still on my apron from baking biscuits. We laughed like children, danced to a crackling radio song in the living room, even before the floors were finished. And oh, how that house embraced us. Through everything, 3 children, 1 miscarriage. Storms that battered the roof, winters where we kept warm by piling blankets high and sitting together in comfortable silence. The night our youngest, Sarah, was born, Robert nearly broke every speed limit in the county just to get me to the hospital. And when he held Sarah in his arms, his entire face softened, like every hard edge from the war had finally dissolved into something gentle. He wasn't a perfect man, but he loved us with a devotion that never wavered. Even in his final days, when the illness had taken most of his strength, Robert insisted I wheel him out to the deck so he could watch the sunrise. That deck he built, that land he tended, that house he never stopped seeing as ours. The last thing he said to me in a clear voice 3 days before he passed was something I had never forgotten. If they love you, they will respect this house. They will see what it means to you. If they don't, Eleanor, don't sign anything. Not a single document. This house was built with love. Don't let them turn it into something ugly. He had looked me directly in the eye. Promise me. And I did. My fingers tightened around the pendant. I had kept that promise. The papers they had asked me to sign, Sarah and Marcus, right after Robert's funeral. I had smiled and said I would consider it. They brought them twice more, Sarah with guilt in her eyes, Marcus with irritation in his. But I never signed. I tucked them away in the bottom drawer of Robert's old desk in this very room, right under the folded flag from his service and the small wooden box that held our wedding rings. I knew what they assumed, that I had eventually given in, that Sarah, being our daughter, had inherited it automatically. That I had no reason to hold on. But they were wrong. I still held the deed, still held the power. And tonight, after what happened downstairs, after Marcus's cruel words and that scalding tea, I realized something Robert probably knew all along. Sometimes, love means protecting not just what was, but what still could be, what still mattered. I stood up slowly, walked across the room to the old desk, opened the drawer, and took out the manila folder. It was slightly dusty, but I knew the weight of it in my hands, like I knew the weight of Robert's voice in my heart. The transfer papers were still there, unsigned, and underneath them, the original deed. In my name, clear as daylight. I sat back on the bed, the papers in my lap, and stared at the signature line, empty, waiting, powerful. In that moment, I no longer felt like a ghost. I felt like something I hadn't felt in months. Alive, and maybe, just maybe, it was time they remembered who this house really belonged to. At dinner that evening, I sat in silence, as I had learned to do. My plate was filled, as always, with whatever remained after everyone else had served themselves. Sarah handed it to me quietly. No eye contact. Just a mechanical gesture. The children chattered about their day at school. Marcus grunted at his phone while chewing. The television murmured something forgettable from the living room. No one asked how I was feeling. No one asked if the burn on my leg was better. It still hurt, red and tender, but I had learned long ago that physical pain was easier to endure than emotional bruising. I buttered my bread with slow, deliberate movements, like I was trying to fill time rather than my stomach. No one noticed. I had become a piece of furniture in that house, a chair in the corner, a curtain no one opened. Sometimes Emma would smile at me, and Tyler would whisper, "Good night, Grandma," when he remembered. But they were children, still innocent, not yet taught how to unsee someone. Sarah caught my eye briefly and gave me that same tight-lipped expression. Then, in the kitchen after dinner, while I was rinsing my own plate under lukewarm water, Sarah approached behind me. "Mom," she said softly, "please don't take what Marcus said this morning to heart. He has been under tremendous stress at work." I turned the water off. I didn't speak. Sarah continued, a little more rushed now, like she just wanted the discomfort to end. "He is not a bad person. He loses his temper sometimes. He doesn't mean anything by it." I turned to look at her. Sarah's eyes shifted to the floor. "He threw scalding tea at me." "Sarah," I said quietly. "In front of your children," Sarah bit her lip. "I know. I really need you to not make things more difficult right now. Please." I nodded once, turned back to the sink, and finished washing my plate. More difficult. That was the phrase Sarah used, as if I were a complication, not a mother, not a human being. Just a burden that made her life more difficult. That night, I sat in bed with a notepad and pen. One of the few things in the house that still felt like mine. I began writing things down, not out of vengeance, but out of necessity. Words, dates, phrases. The 15th of February, you just eat and watch television. At least the cat catches mice. The 3rd of March, threw my pill organizer in the trash, said, "Keep your medications out of my kitchen." The 18th of April, rolled his eyes at my cardigan on the couch. "Are you hanging laundry in my living room now?" It became a small ritual, quiet, invisible. I hid the notebook beneath my pillow each morning. The act gave me back something small. My memory, my clarity, my truth. They might erase me with silence during the day, but I would write myself back into existence at night. I began to watch Marcus more closely. The way he walked like the house was a theater, and everyone in it owed him applause. The way Sarah flinched when he raised his voice, even when it wasn't directed at her. The way he tossed his work boots into the hallway every evening, like the floor should be grateful to receive them. The colder Sarah became, the more I felt her drifting, not just from me, but from herself. My daughter, once so full of laughter and defiance, now moved like someone afraid of breaking. I wanted to ask her where the spark had gone, but the answer was too obvious to ignore. It had been extinguished by years of trying to keep the peace. Peace that cost too much. One evening, I was walking down the hallway when I heard Marcus on the phone. His voice carried from the garage. I stopped, unseen, just outside the cracked door. "Yeah, dude," he was saying, chuckling. "I swear it is like living with a phantom. The old woman just drifts around the house. Eats my food, says thank you like she is nobility, doesn't lift a finger. Says her knee hurts. Hell, I would rather clean a dog shelter than live with a mother-in-law who thinks she is owed everything." There was laughter on the other end of the line. Marcus joined in. My heart slowed, not stopped, just slowed. It was a strange feeling, somewhere between heartbreak and resignation. I turned and walked back to my room without making a sound. That night, I didn't write in my notebook, I just stared at the ceiling, the shadows dancing across it from the streetlight outside. I replayed that sentence over and over. I would rather clean a dog shelter. He thought I was less than an animal. I remembered a story Robert once told me from his days in the service. He said the worst insult he ever heard was not shouted, but whispered behind someone's back. It wasn't the volume that hurt, he told me. It was the fact that someone believed it and thought no one else would care. Marcus believed what he said, and he thought no one else would care. Least of all, me. But I did care. I cared more than he could ever imagine. Not because his words surprised me, but because they confirmed what I had feared for months. I was no longer Eleanor, the woman who once made Christmas dinners for 25 people in this very house. Not Eleanor, who sewed Sarah's wedding dress when they couldn't afford the store. Bought one, not Eleanor, who held my newborn grandchild in this living room and wept with joy. I was a placeholder, a background character in a story that had long since erased my name from the script. That was when I began to see the house differently, not as a home, but as a battleground of memory. And I realized in my bones that if I died tomorrow, they would not remember me as the woman who built a life here. They would remember me as the old lady who sat in the corner. And that was not going to be my ending. The next morning, before anyone else stirred, I unlocked the bottom drawer of Robert's old writing desk. The air was still and heavy, the kind of silence that clung to your skin. I knelt down, wincing slightly from the stiffness in my knee, and reached inside, pulling out a faded brown folder. One Robert had kept secure for years. My fingers brushed over its surface like it was sacred. And to me, it was. I opened it slowly, reverently. Inside were the documents, aged, yellowing slightly at the edges, but crisp and intact. The deed to the house. The original transfer agreement Robert had drawn up with his lawyer nearly 8 years ago. I remembered the meeting clearly, even though I had barely understood the legal terms at the time. It had been a quiet afternoon in our kitchen. Robert sat across from our longtime attorney, Mr. James Mitchell, with a pen in hand and his brow furrowed, with the same serious look he wore whenever he was fixing something that mattered. "I want the house to go to Sarah someday," he would said. "But not automatically, not without Eleanor's consent. This place was built with her in mind. No one deserves it more than her, and if someone ever treats her like she is less than family, I want her to be able to say, 'This is mine, and you don't belong here.'" I remembered the way Robert looked at me when he said that, not with sentiment, but with clarity, as though he knew somehow that a day might come when I would need that power. Mr. Mitchell nodded and drafted the clause. The property would be willed to Sarah in name, but the transfer of full ownership required one final signature. Mine, and that signature, to this day, had never been written. I stared at the blank line again. Now, years later, empty, waiting. The only thing between me and freedom. I held the papers tightly and placed them in a plain envelope, then slipped on my coat. The clock read 7:30 a.m. The house was still asleep. Marcus never rose before 8:30 on weekends. Sarah stayed in bed even longer. I had time. I took the local bus into town, sitting by the window. The folder pressed flat against my chest, as if it could protect me from everything outside. The town hadn't changed much. Same streets, same coffee shop on the corner, same courthouse, with fresh white paint. Mr. James Mitchell still worked in the same building on Oak Street, just above the bakery that always smelled of cinnamon. I buzzed at the entrance and waited. He opened the door, startled at first, but then smiled gently. "Well, if it isn't Eleanor Thompson, my goodness, it has been too long." I nodded, unable to keep my voice from shaking. "I need to talk to you." About the house, he gestured me inside, and soon we were sitting across from each other, just like all those years ago. I pulled out the folder and placed the papers in front of him. "I never signed it, James," I said quietly, "but I think I might want to." He looked over the documents carefully, adjusting his glasses. "You have every right to," he confirmed. "Robert structured this exactly how he said he would. It is all here, in black and white. You are the final authority." The words settled in the air like dust. I leaned back in the chair and let out a breath I hadn't realized I would been holding for months. "And if I choose to sell it?" I asked. "You can sell it. Gift it. Lease it. Donate it," he said. "It is legally yours to decide." That made me smile faintly. Donate it. The image was appealing. He hesitated for a moment. "You thinking about leaving? I am thinking about surviving," I said. He nodded, understanding in his eyes. We talked a while longer, discussing logistics. He said he could help manage the process quietly, if that was what I needed. I told him it was exactly what I needed. Quiet, but final. When I stepped out of his office, the sky had brightened, and I felt strangely taller, like the air around me had shifted. I walked for a bit through the small downtown, past storefronts and flower beds, past children holding their parents' hands. And then I found myself pausing at a public bulletin board nailed to the side of the post office. Among the flyers for music lessons and lost pets was a printed notice in bold blue letters, seeking property donors. Local Community Garden Coalition looking for urban farmland. Help feed Portland's future. Let your property become a legacy. A phone number was listed below. I stared at it, then I read it again. And again, a slow, undeniable idea began to form. I thought about the land behind our house, the wide open space, the trees that still remembered Robert's hands, the garden where Sarah used to pick strawberries. I remembered how Robert would say, "This place is peace." I want it to stay peaceful long after we are gone. Maybe it still could be. I pulled the flyer down and folded it into my coat pocket. When I got home, I went straight to my room and pulled out a local map from Robert's old filing cabinet. I spread it out over the bed and ran my finger over the lines that bordered our land. 18 acres undeveloped, still zoned as private residential. Exactly the kind of land a community garden group might want. Exactly the kind of land they were searching for. I sat back and stared at the map, the realization settling over me like the first cool breeze after a brutal summer. If I sold this house, not to Sarah, not to Marcus, not to any of the neighbors, but to someone who would protect it, preserve it, keep it out of their hands forever, that would be the justice Robert would have wanted, and the revenge I had never allowed myself to consider until now. I folded the map carefully, placed it next to the flyer, and sat in the silence of my room, hearing the echoes of Marcus's laughter from downstairs, and Sarah's voice calling the kids to come clean up. They thought I was a shadow, but they had no idea. The light was about to shift, and when it did, they would see me clearly for the first time in years. I waited until late Monday morning, when I knew the house would be empty. Marcus had gone to work early, grumbling about traffic like always, and Sarah had taken the children to their swimming and violin lessons. The only sounds were the distant hum of the refrigerator and the ticking clock above the kitchen window. I sat down at Robert's old desk, with the flyer laid out beside me, and dialed the number listed at the bottom. The phone rang twice. "Thank you for calling the Portland Community Garden Coalition. How may I help you?" A bright, polite voice answered. I cleared my throat. "Yes, good morning. I saw your flyer downtown about the property donation." "Yes, madam. We are currently reviewing several properties for our urban farm project. May I ask your name?" I hesitated. "Just a beat, actually. I would prefer not to give my full name over the phone." "Not yet. I am in a delicate situation." A pause. Then warmth returned. "Of course, madam. We understand privacy. Would you like to schedule a discreet assessment?" "Yes. I would like someone to come take a look, quietly. I don't want anyone in the household to know." "Is that possible?" "Certainly. We have done off-record evaluations before. What is the property address?" I gave it slowly and clearly. My heart was pounding by the end of the call. They scheduled a private visit for Thursday afternoon. When I hung up, I stared at the phone for a long moment, then tucked it back in the drawer. A strange calmness came over me, like the kind you feel before a storm when everything goes eerily still. That Thursday, at precisely 2:45, a green pickup truck pulled up to the edge of the property. Two individuals stepped out, a man in his 40s, wearing a coalition t-shirt, and a woman carrying a tablet. I met them at the back gate, wearing a wide-brimmed hat and old gardening gloves. I had dressed purposefully in plain clothes and greeted them with a slight accent I hadn't used in years. "Y'all the folks from the coalition?" I asked. The woman smiled. We are here to evaluate the land." "Well, the owners is not home," I said, nodding toward the house. "I am just the caretaker, been tending to this place since the old man passed. You will have to be quiet." They exchanged a glance, then nodded in understanding. I led them around the property, pointing out the boundaries. The tree line, the small creek that still ran clean through the southern edge of the pasture. They took photos, marked notes, murmured to each other. They asked about soil quality, wildlife sightings, zoning restrictions. I answered everything. I had lived on this land for over 35 years. I knew it better than I knew the back of my own hands. Before they left, the woman turned to me and said, "We would be very interested. If you are the one with authority, we would love to send over an offer and draft paperwork for review." "I am," I said softly. "And yes, please do." That night, I couldn't sleep, not from anxiety, but from adrenaline. The next day, the email arrived. The offer was fair. More than fair, enough for me to leave. enough to begin again, enough to ensure Marcus and Sarah would never step foot on this land again. I printed the documents, sat down with a steady hand, and signed the intent to transfer. It was a quiet victory, and yet my fingers trembled just slightly. I sealed the envelope, wrote the date for notarization on the top, and slid it into the drawer alongside the original deed. All that remained was the final signature at the courthouse. That night, as the sun dipped below the trees, casting long golden shadows across the living room floor, I stood quietly in my room and began folding clothes. One by one, neatly and without rush, I filled a small suitcase. Not everything, just enough. My nightgown, my pendant, the notebook, a framed photo of Robert, the brown folder, a worn Bible, 2 sweaters, my arthritis medication, a small jar of peppermint drops. It was peaceful, almost meditative, like preparing for a long-awaited trip. Then I heard laughter from the living room. I paused, peering through the narrow crack in the door. I saw them, Marcus with his feet on the coffee table, arm wrapped around Sarah, both of them watching some comedy show, chuckling like everything in the world was fine, like the insults, the dismissals, the tea, the silence, had never happened. Sarah leaned her head on his shoulder. He leaned down and kissed the top of her hair. The sound of their joy rang in my ears like static. And still, I said nothing. Just closed the door and zipped the suitcase. That moment stayed with me longer than I expected. Not because it made me sad, but because it made me certain. They thought I was upstairs, invisible. But I was downstairs in my mind, opening the future one zipper at a time. Tomorrow, I would leave this house not as a victim, but as its rightful owner, signing it away to a future where they would never belong. The morning was still dark when I slipped out the front door, the sky just beginning to lift its curtain of stars. I moved quietly, careful not to let the old hinges squeak, clutching my purse with both hands. Inside was everything I needed. The notarized documents, the original deed, my identification, and a small envelope with the last letter Robert ever wrote me, just for strength. The house was silent behind me. No footsteps, no children awake, no shouting, no cruel laughter. Only the low hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak of the settling wood. They were all still asleep. I stood at the curb for a moment, breathing in the cold Oregon air. It tasted like freedom. A yellow taxi rolled up exactly at 6:30 as I had scheduled. The driver, a middle-aged woman with music playing low on the radio, helped load my small suitcase into the back. She didn't ask questions. I was grateful. "Downtown?" she asked. "Yes," I said. "Courthouse first, then one more stop." We drove in silence. At the county clerk's office, I submitted every document in that envelope, with hands steady as stone. The man behind the counter smiled, checked the paperwork, and nodded. "Everything looks good, Mrs. Thompson. The Community Garden Coalition wired the funds yesterday morning. We have already received verification. So quick and so simple. So irreversible. I asked for a copy of the completed transaction for my records." As he printed the final page, he said, "You know, it is rare we see folks donate land like this. You are preserving something really special." I smiled. "That is the idea." From there, I had the taxi take me across town to visit a friend I hadn't seen in years. Patricia Williams, a widow like me, with a sharp wit and a garden full of roses. We had fallen out of touch after Robert passed, mostly my doing. But when I called her last week and asked if I could stay for a few days, Patricia didn't hesitate. "Of course you can," she would said. "I have got a warm bed and fresh cookies. You just bring your stories." Patricia didn't ask why I was leaving. She just opened her door and wrapped me in a hug. That afternoon, I received confirmation from the coalition. The transfer of land had gone through. The house and acreage were now officially part of the Portland Community Garden Project, effective immediately. I spent the next day reading on Patricia's porch, watching birds chase each other across the roofline. There was no bitterness in my heart, just stillness. The kind that comes after a storm you have survived and finally stepped out from under. But back at the house, my former house, things were not so calm. At precisely 10:15 a.m. the next morning, Marcus answered the door to find 2 uniformed county officers and a legal representative from the Community Garden Coalition standing on the porch. "Is this the residence of Marcus and Sarah Williams?" the officer asked. Marcus blinked. "Yeah, we are here to inform you that the property you are occupying has been legally transferred. You are now considered tenants without contract or right of residence. You are being issued a 48-hour notice to vacate." He laughed. "What the hell are you talking about? My wife owns this house." The representative handed him a folder. "She does not. Never did. The house was never signed over. Mrs. Eleanor Thompson retained full authority. She has executed a legal donation. The property now belongs to the Portland Community Garden Coalition." Sarah appeared behind him, barefoot and panicked, eyes wide as she grabbed the papers. "Number. No, this has to be a mistake. My mom lives here. This is our home. Our kids' home." The officer remained calm. "Madam, you will have to take it up in court if you believe your rights were violated. But I assure you the transaction is legitimate. You must vacate the premises within 48 hours or face legal removal." Chaos erupted. Sarah cried out, begging to see me. Marcus cursed so loudly the neighbor across the street stepped out onto their porch. Emma and Tyler stood behind their mother, silent, clinging to each other. Then came the moment I had prepared for. I arrived 20 minutes later, walking down the gravel path toward the house in a simple navy coat, holding the legal agreement in my hand like a folded flag. The officer turned. "Mrs. Thompson?" I nodded. Sarah spotted me first. "Mom." She ran toward me, tears streaking her face. "What did you do? Why would you do this?" "We needed you, the kids. This is their home." I looked her in the eyes and said nothing for a moment. I needed Sarah to feel the silence the way I had for months. Then I said calmly, "You said I took up space." Marcus stormed toward me, fists clenched. "You had no right. This was my home too." I turned to him, standing taller than I had in years. "Your home," you hurled scalding tea at me like I was garbage. "You mocked me to your friends. You lived under my roof and acted like I was a stray animal." He opened his mouth, but I raised my hand. "You all said I didn't belong, that I was in the way." Well, I was never in the way. I was the foundation. I stepped closer and held out the deed in my hand. I built this life. I built this house, and now I am building something else. I paused, then delivered the final words like a stone dropping into water. I didn't take up space. I was the space, and now this space is no longer yours. With that, I turned and walked away. The wind light against my back. The weight I had carried for so long lifted at last. I never imagined myself starting a foundation. Truth be told, I never even imagined leaving that house. For years, I thought I would simply fade into the wallpaper, pass quietly in my sleep, and be remembered only by the shadows that collected in the corners of the hallway. But sometimes, it only takes one broken plate, one thrown cup of tea, one final insult to wake something up inside you. 2 weeks after the sale was finalized and the property fully transferred to the Portland Community Garden Coalition, I sat across from my attorney in his office. The sun warmed through the window as we reviewed the wire transfer confirmation. "Everything looks good," he said, sliding the papers into a neat folder. "So, what will you do next?" I smiled slowly, a little shy at first. "I want to help people like me, people who were forgotten inside their own families, people who still have value, even if no one at their dinner table can see it anymore." He raised his brows. "Like a non-profit." "Exactly like that," I said. "I already have a name for it." I pulled out a napkin from my purse where I had scribbled the letters. "Elder Empowering Lives, Dignifying Elder Rights." He chuckled. "Catchy and fitting." With his help and a friend from the local bank, I opened an account and filed the paperwork to establish the foundation legally. Within a month, I had set up a small team, volunteers at first, mostly women from my old book club, a retired social worker, and one energetic college intern named David, who called me Mrs. T like I was royalty. We started small: care packages for homebound elders, monthly phone calls to check in on seniors, living alone, legal guidance for those facing property abuse or coercion. But the most powerful thing we offered, it turned out, wasn't food or funding. It was voice. We hosted our first community talk in the basement of a Methodist church on a Tuesday night. I thought maybe 6 people would show up. 40 came. By the second event, we had nearly 90 grandmothers, veterans, widowers, a quiet woman who had been kicked out of her son's house after her heart surgery, a man whose family refused to visit unless he handed over his pension checks. I stood up in front of them, heart pounding, and told them my story, from the burn on my leg to the deed in my name, from the silence at the dinner table to the knock on the door that changed everything. I told them about Robert and the promise I had kept. And when I finished, there was no applause, just silence, but not the cold kind. This silence was full, heavy, reverent. Then someone clapped, and another. And then they stood, some crying, some nodding. The next morning, a local news crew called and asked if I would share my story on air. Apparently, someone had recorded part of the talk and posted it online. I hesitated. "I am not sure I want to become a spectacle," I said. But the young producer on the line replied, "Mrs. Thompson, you are not a spectacle." The segment aired the following week. They filmed me sitting on Patricia's porch, sipping iced tea, the rose garden dancing behind me. They added soft piano music and cut in images of my old house, now with a sign posted out front: "Protected land, future site of Portland Community Gardens." The story took off. Before I knew it, I was invited to speak on a podcast, then at a state elder rights summit in Salem. Strangers began sending letters, some from as far as Florida and Montana. Many started the same way. "I saw you on the news and cried. I have been living like a ghost too. You reminded me that I am not invisible." At some point, a radio host nicknamed me the Tea Lady who took the land. I thought it would bother me, but it didn't. In fact, I laughed. Yes, that is exactly who I was. I was the woman who had had hot tea hurled at her in her own kitchen and turned that humiliation into something sacred. I was the woman who had been called a burden, a problem, too old, and turned her silence into a megaphone. The Elder Foundation continued to grow. We secured a grant to create an emergency housing fund for elders in domestic crisis. We partnered with local churches and libraries to offer workshops on property law and inheritance rights. We launched a hotline. David built a website. Patricia ran our Facebook page, posting quotes from our talks and pictures of the cookies we served at meetings. At the 1-year anniversary of the foundation's founding, we held an outdoor celebration in the new community garden where my house once stood. The trees stood tall, the wind was cool, the land was quiet, and under a large maple tree, a brass plaque had been installed. It read, "In honor of Eleanor Thompson." She took up space and gave it back a guardian of dignity. I stood in front of that plaque, tears in my eyes, surrounded by people, many of them older, many of them forgotten by their own, but standing tall, holding hands, smiling. I felt Robert then, not just in memory, but in presence, like he was leaning just over my shoulder, whispering, "Told you not to sign anything." That night, back at Patricia's, I looked into the mirror and hardly recognized myself. Not because I looked younger, but because I looked awake, bright, whole. I smiled. Not the careful smile I used at family dinners, not the polite one I wore in their house, but a real one, wide and unashamed. It was the first smile in years that felt like it belonged entirely to me. I used to believe that once your children grew up, your job was to disappear quietly, to not cause trouble, to not take up space. But I learned that some things, like dignity, like your voice, are worth taking space for. After selling the house, I didn't just find freedom. I found a chance to do something meaningful, so I founded the Elder Foundation, empowering lives, dignifying elder rights. It started on Patricia's kitchen table, with a pen, a notepad, and a cold cup of coffee. ELDER wasn't just my description anymore. It became a mission. We began by helping isolated elders, delivering groceries, organizing support circles, and simply listening. For many, it was the first time they would spoken their pain out loud. One woman said, "I didn't think anyone would care if I disappeared. That is when I knew we were doing something that mattered." Then, someone shared a video of me telling my story. From the tea thrown at me to the deed I never signed. It went viral. Letters poured in. People said I gave them permission to stand up. When the news called me the tea lady who took the land, I didn't flinch. That teacup. It drew a line. I stepped over it and found myself again. I didn't just reclaim a house. I reclaimed myself. My days are quieter now, and finally mine. I live in a small yellow house, with white shutters on the edge of a forest, where the mornings begin with coffee and bird songs, and the evenings end with golden lamplight and the rustle of oak trees. The rocking chair on my porch creaks, like an old friend, reminding me that I am still here, still choosing peace over noise. People come sometimes, strangers who have heard about the tea lady who took the land, women who feel invisible, who have been silenced too long. They come with stories. I listen. I offer coffee, and if they ask for advice, I give only what I know. That silence is not love, and forgiveness is not permission to return to harm. Last month, a letter came from Sarah. She said sorry. She said she left him. I read her words, folded them gently, and placed the letter in my drawer. I forgave her, but I didn't write back. Some doors don't need reopening to heal. Each night, I whisper to Robert's photo. I didn't sign it, and I didn't become a shadow. Then I sleep, light as air, dreaming only of trees and the quiet I finally earned. If you have made it to the end of this story, thank you. Thank you for listening, not just to a tale, but to a journey of dignity, resilience, and quiet strength. My story wasn't just about a deed that was never signed. It was about people like me, elders who were once seen as a burden, but in truth are the roots holding entire families together. In the end, I didn't just take back a house. I reclaimed my voice, my worth, and my power to choose peace over silence. If you believe that older people deserve to be heard, respected, and remembered, subscribe to her light today. Here, we share deeply emotional and powerful true stories each week, about grandmothers, mothers, and those who were once forgotten, but found their strength when no one expected it. Click subscribe and turn on the bell so you never miss a story that just might change how you see the world. Her light, because truth has no expiration date, and courage is never too late.